Hey, this is going to be a short tutorial on getting started with using our principled organic materials product, including what's inside, adding it to your scenes, and showing you how you can customize the materials to get different looks. For the demo, I'm going to be focusing on the Alien Egg shader material, which is the material that is included in the free version of this product. So even if you're not ready to commit to purchasing the full pack, hopefully this video will help you to get started with evaluating whether this product works well for you. So first, let's just take a look at what you're actually going to get when you purchase and download this product. So what you're going to get with this product is a set of .blend files, each of which corresponds to a different version of Blender. So you want to make sure that you're using the version that corresponds to the version of Blender that you're using. For example, in this case, I'm going to be using Blender 4.0. So I'm going to open this principled organic materials file for Blender 4.0. So when you open this file, what you're going to see is this sphere in the middle, this asset browser over here on the left, and then over here on the right, you're going to see a couple of different collections where the product assets are actually going to be. So the first collection is a lights and camera collection, and then the second collection is this principled organic materials collection that actually has the materials in this product pack. So I'm going to switch over to the shading view here so we can actually see. And we can see right now what we're previewing is this alien eggs material. So basically what is in this .blend file is a collection of spheres. So there's one sphere for every material in the pack, and that sphere has that material applied to it. So here we're looking at the alien eggs, then the alien sponge, and so forth. So this is just a .blend file with a collection of spheres, each with one of the materials applied to it. So let's start with a new fresh Blender file scene and actually get started with bringing those materials into our own scenes in Blender. And the easiest way to do this is going to be using the Blender asset browser, which is going to enable you to just drag and drop materials onto your meshes in your scenes. So let me show you how to get that set up real quick. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is just save those .blend files in a file location where you want to keep it, where you're going to store these assets. And then the next thing that you want to do is in a Blender file scene, it doesn't matter which one, go to Edit, Preferences, go to the File Paths tab, and then in the File Paths tab, you're going to come over to this plus icon, and then you're just going to navigate to the folder in your computer directory where you have saved those .blend files. So in this case, I've saved it in this principled organic materials folder. So I'm going to open that, go to add asset library, and then close out of this. And then the next thing that I'm going to do is just come over here, drag, open a new window, come up to this menu and change to the asset browser. And then if we go to this drop down menu here, we can come down and go to that library that we just added. And now you can see is that we have all of the materials from the principled organic materials now available to us. And just to illustrate how this can work, what I'm going to do is first just subdivide this cube so I have a little more geometry to work with by hitting Control 5. I'm going to go to Shade Smooth, and we're going to enable the Cycles Render Engine and change to GPU Compute. And then I'm just going to bring up the shading viewport. So once you have any Blender scene set up now that you have added these files to your asset library, is you can literally just drag and drop those materials into your scene, and it will apply the material to whatever mesh you dragged it onto. So now you have a really simple way to use these materials in all of your Blender scenes. Okay, so now that we have the asset browser set up, I just want to show you a couple of things that are really important for making sure these materials are set up correctly. So let's actually use the alien egg sac material. I'm going to drag that in. I'm going to bring this light a little bit closer just so that we can see this material better. And then there are three main things that are really important to consider just for the general setup for these materials. So the first is that these materials really work best when you use the Cycles Render Engine, and I'm going to show you why. So let's switch over from Cycles to Eevee. And now what you can see is that this material looks really flat. And the reason for that is that Eevee doesn't support real geometry displacement in shaders. And these materials really make use of that real geometric displacement, and we can only get that in cycles. And the second thing that I want to show you is that if you recall, I started with the default cube and I actually added 5 subdivisions to it by hitting Control 5. And I'm actually going to add a little bit more. I'm going to bring this up to 8. But the important thing that I want to show you is that when you're using this real geometric displacement in the cycles render engine, it really matters the amount of detail that you have in your mesh. So if I change the level of subdivision down to 3, or maybe even lower, then what you can see is that we're starting to lose some of that detail in the displacement, and that's going to be even more evident for some of the other materials. So the real geometric displacement can only be as detailed as your mesh is. And then the final thing that I want to show you is making sure that the displacement properties are set up properly in the actual material properties. So if you come over here to the material properties tab and go down to the settings drop down menu, you'll see this surface displacement option right here. And right now it's set to displacement and bump. Well, let's change it to one of the other settings. So the first setting is bump only. And if we change it to bump only, now we again are getting this very flat appearance that looks similar to the Eevee render engine. And the reason is that this is just using fake bump rather than real geometric displacement. And an alternative setting is going to be displacement only, where now we're getting real geometric displacement, but it seems as though we've lost some of the detail, the finer detail in the displacement. So if we set this to displacement and bump, now we're getting the full depth of that material. And the reason is that basically what this is doing is for the coarser or larger details, it's using real displacement. But for those finer details where we don't actually have as much detail in our mesh, it's using that fake displacement. And this gives us sort of a balance between those two different options. Okay, so now that we have the displacement set up correctly, now we can actually get started with customizing the materials. So there's 2 different places where we could potentially customize the materials. The first is in a shader network area. So I'm going to go over to the shading workspace. I'm going to change the viewport shading. And then now what you see is that we have this simple node network that has been automatically set up when we applied this material. And there's a couple of main things that I want to show here. The first is this node group here that has all of these customization options available to us. And that's where you're really going to tune the look of the material. And then the second thing is that you can see that it's connected to this vector node that is controlling the texture coordinates. So in this case, we're using the generated coordinates, which doesn't require us to have any UV textures, and which will really map the texture coordinates based on the shape of the geometry. But if you do have a UV unwrapped object and you want to use the UV coordinates, you could connect that to this mapping node. And then the second place that we can go to customize the look of these materials is if we come over to the material properties tab here, then now we can see that we have this same set of options available to us just right here on the right. And there are a bunch of different options that we can use to customize the look of the material. So all of these materials are set up to try to provide you with independent controls of multiple different features, and that includes both control over color as well as geometric information. So for the example in this alien egg shader, which I'm going to pull this out a little bit, we can change a bunch of different properties. For example, the egg scale lets us change how frequently those eggs are repeating, so we can make them repeat really frequently or be much bigger and repeat a lot less frequently. We can change multiple different color options in these eggs. So here we have 2 different colors that are being blended together in these peaks of these eggs, as well as a separate parameter that is controlling the color of the groove. So we can see we can make it really bright green. We can make it a lot of different colors, really any color that we want. And then also the veins have their own control that we can independently tune to adjust the color of those. And then in addition to that, we can independently control a bunch of different parameters related to the geometry. So for example, we could change the thickness of the veins to make them thin or as thick as we like. Similar to the eggs, we can change the repeat pattern by changing this vein scale parameter. And there are a number of other parameters that you can play around with that can really allow you to experiment with different looks. And in addition to these custom parameters that we built into these materials, we're also giving you access to some of the standard parameters from the principled BSDF shader. So for example, you have access to the roughness, which is the same as they would work in the principled BSDF shader, that is controlling these specular reflections, so we can make it really diffuse, or we can make the reflections really sharp. You also have the clear coat weight and roughness, which adds that additional layer of sort of wetness to the material. And then another really important aspect of these materials that are sort of flesh-like is the subsurface scattering. So you can control the weight of that, or the strength of it, as well as the length scale of the scattering in that material. So you can make it really large to really create that sort of organic look. And then of course you might also want to change things like the strength of the displacement. So we could bring, for example, the displacement all the way down to 0 and make it completely flat. We can make it a really strong displacement. And then if you actually look at these parameters, there are also parameters for independently controlling some of the geometric features. So we could control the vein displacement without altering the egg displacement. We can make it really strong or really flat. And we could also change the egg displacement and make that really strong or really flat without affecting the displacement of the eggs. So the best way to really get a sense for what all these different parameters do is to just play around with the different values, experiment, and see if you can get a sense for how things look, and you can create a bunch of different looks just by tuning these parameters. Alright, that's going to be everything for this tutorial. There's a ton of different things that you can do with these materials, and if there are more customization options that you'd like to see, please let us know, and we might incorporate those into future releases. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at BKSciVizTools, and also we'd love to see what you make using these materials.